91, I believe, is all about the benefits of believing. There are certain benefits that go with a right relationship with God, and Psalm 91 touches on those. Now, many believe that Moses is the penman of this psalm. There is an ancient Jewish tradition that says that if we know the author of a psalm, and the psalm following it, we're not given the author of that psalm or the penman of that psalm, that the two go together. I don't know that there's any truth in that or not. It may be, may not be. It's been suggested at least. It does seem to me that Psalm 91 probably was penned by Moses. My reason for believing that is because they share so much in common and they seem to be from the same penman. And we'll see some of those comparisons tonight. Maybe you'll be convinced of it as I am. There seems to be a connection. Both of them talk about God as man's dwelling place. Psalm 90 does. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, and Psalm 91 does. Notice Psalm 90 and verse 1 says, Lord, Thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. And then when you go to Psalm 91, it says, in verse 1, it says, He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust. And then you go down to verse 9, because Thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, Thy habitation. And so both of these Psalms deal with the fact that God is the habitation or the dwelling place of His people. But more than that, there seems to be a connection between Psalm 90 and Psalm 91 and something that we know that Moses penned. If you'll go back to Deuteronomy chapter 32, Deuteronomy chapter 32, rather Deuteronomy 33, beginning in verse 27, says, The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. And He shall thrust out the enemy from before thee, and shall say, Destroy them. Israel then shall dwell in safety alone. The fountain of Jacob shall be upon a land of corn and wine, as also his heavens shall drop down dew. Happy art thou, O Israel, who is like unto thee, O people saved by the Lord, the shield of thy help, and who is the sword of thy excellency. And thine enemies shall be found liars unto thee, and thou shalt tread upon their high places. There's a connection as well, if you go back to Deuteronomy 32 and verse 30, with some of what's contained even within this psalm. How shall one chase 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight, except the rockets sold them, and the Lord had shut them up. And so we know that the book of Deuteronomy was penned by Moses. And we know that Psalm 90, at least we're convinced that Psalm 90 was as well penned by him. And so there is a connection between Psalm 90 and Deuteronomy 32 and 33. And there seems to be a connection between these two and Psalm 91, because there's a great parallel that exists between these passages. Take a look, if you will, at Deuteronomy chapter 33 in verses 27 through 29, and take a look at some of the connections. Notice that Deuteronomy 32 and verse 27 begins with the eternal God. If you recall in Psalm 90 and verse 1, that was the point of that psalm, was the fact that God is eternal. Man is not. Man's days are limited. They're 70, but God's days are not limited. He is from everlasting to everlasting. Psalm 90 and verse 2. He was here before the mountains were brought forth. He was here before the earth and the world were formed. God is everlasting. And so Moses talks about the eternal God. He says, the eternal God is thy refuge. We've already talked about Psalm 90 and verse 1. He's the habitation of all generations. And then Psalm 91 verses 1 and 2, again speaking of Him as our habitation. Notice underneath are the everlasting arms. That's what Moses said. Notice the connection between that and Psalm 91 in verses 11 and 12. For He shall give His angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou shalt dash thy foot against the stone. Notice the angels bearing us up. the idea of God's everlasting arms or God's support being beneath us. Moses says, He shall thrust out the enemy from before thee. Notice Psalm 91 in verse 7. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh unto thee. Notice in verse 13 as well. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under thy feet. The idea that God's people are going to be successful. They're going to overcome the enemy. Notice that Moses continues and he talks about them dwelling in safety alone. Notice the idea of Psalm 91 in verses 5 and 6. It is the idea of safety. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. You don't have to be afraid of any of these things. You're going to dwell in safety, was what Moses said in Deuteronomy 33, and it is what is being said here. Notice as well in verse 10, there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. Again, the idea of safety is contained in both of these passages. But let's continue and notice what else he says. He says, the fountain of Jacob shall be upon a land of corn and wine. Notice verse 16 of this psalm. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. Both the idea of a good land and being able to live in that land for generations. Moses says, happy art thou, O Israel, who is like unto thee, O people saved by the Lord. And notice how this psalm talks about salvation again and again. Verse 3, surely he shall deliver or save thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. Notice as well the references to salvation within this psalm. Notice verses 14 through 16. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver or save him. I will set him on high because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him or save him and honor him. Verse 16, with long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. We see the connection between the two passages as well. Notice Moses continues in talking about the Lord as our shield. Notice what he says in Psalm 91 and verse 4. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Again, the connection between the two ideas.